Annie and her fiancé Luke are shopping for new knives, and she narrates about getting married in 6 weeks. Soon, she finds herself daydreaming about holding two blades with blood on them, and her husband dead. She snaps out of it quickly. Later, Annie and her friend Nell take the subway, and Annie is visibly anxious about taking it. She has flashbacks of someone breaking into a window and a gun is shot through it. Annie works for a magazine called The Women's Bible, and her focus is on how to please men in the bedroom. She hopes to become a senior editor. She impresses her boss on the daily. Later, Annie meets up with Aaron, a documentary filmmaker. He wants to ask Annie about the deadliest private school shooting in history. They want to know if Annie is a hero or an accomplice. Apparently, Annie's full first name is Tiff Annie. Aaron has uncovered a different side to the shooting and wants to get Annie's take. A man named Dean has agreed to do the documentary. She excuses Aaron since she wants nothing to do with Dean or the documentary. After the meeting, she searches up Dean Barton, the man Aaron had mentioned. Dean accused Tiff Annie of being involved in the school shooting. Dean is also a survivor of the shooting, and he's running for Congress. The movie transitions to a young Annie about to attend Brentley Private School, where the shooting had occurred. It's her first day at school, and she already leaves an impression on people. We meet the younger version of Dean, who is one of the popular boys. There's also Peyton, Liam, and Olivia. Arthur brings her over to a different table to avoid the toxicity of the popular crew. Later, we see Dean on a morning news show talking about how his spinal cord was shot at, leading to his permanent disability, and how he's pro-gun control. Luke tells Annie that she shouldn't feel forced to do the documentary. He breaks the news to Annie about getting a job offer at London, but Annie doesn't want to go. She feels like she's getting close to the senior editor title at her job. In the past, at a dance, Arthur gets in trouble for bringing alcohol. Hillary, Olivia, and Annie leave the dance to go on a joyride with a bunch of dudes. Andrew Larson, a teacher at the school, tries to stop the girls but eventually lets them go. While trying on dresses, her mother Dina and Annie get into an argument. Nell wants to know if Annie is really ready to expose Dean for who he really is, and Annie seems hesitant. While Annie scrolls through Facebook, a woman named Hannah Ross calls Annie a psycho slut. Hannah Ross is the aunt of Liam Ross, a victim of the school shooting. The movie transitions to Annie having a great time with Liam. Annie gets called into the office by her boss, and she's told that they're both going to the New York Times. At dinner, Annie serendipitously meets Andrew Larson. Andrew is Annie's teacher from the private school. Annie finds out that Mr. Larson is also doing the documentary. She imagines stabbing her husband's hand for some reason. Annie lies about taking a job at London with her husband. While waiting for a cab, Annie and Mr. Larson have a pleasant conversation. In the cab, Luke is annoyed about Annie lying during dinner. She finally tells Luke that she got the job at the New York Times and how she wants to tell their side of the story about the school shooting. However, she is afraid of doing it because she's a sex columnist going against the pro-gun control survivor Dean. This is the reason why she wants to stay in America, to work for a more esteemed news outlet. Back in the past, Peyton is going down on a half-awake Annie. Liam walks in on the non-consensual act and tells Peyton to hurry up. Annie then stumbles out in the hallway barely coherent. Peyton then passes Annie to Liam, who takes advantage of her. Annie pants and says no, and tries to get Liam off her without any luck. Once she's finally coherent, Dean gets a hold of her and slams her onto the bed. She begs Dean to stop, but then he forces his way into her. The movie transitions into the grown-up Annie throwing a tantrum in the cab. Then she screams at Luke to not touch her. Young Annie is able to escape to a convenience store, where she finds Mr. Larson. She hugs him tightly while she sobs. Mr. Larson brings Annie to his home, then tries to convince her to bring her to the hospital and to call Annie's mom. However, Annie refuses all of that. The next day, before she meets Aaron, a loud constructional clanking startles her. Apparently, Dean wants to reconcile with Annie. Annie doesn't want anything to do with Dean and wants to be separate when she does the interview. Dean is claiming that Annie willingly participated in a gang foreplay and claims it was all consensual. At the end of the meeting with Erin, she fully reclaims the title of victim and wears it as a badge of honor instead of feeling shame. Later, Dean is on the news fighting for gun control. Annie tells Nell she's afraid she'll feel bad for Dean when she sees him in his wheelchair. While with her soon-to-be in-laws, they talk about how they're pro-gun. Annie is annoyed by them all, so she walks away, but she ends up offending her Aunt Karen. Annie is followed by her mom, who was supposed to comfort her, but she ends up telling Annie that the documentary could ruin her own reputation. Dina doesn't want people to see Annie as a slut, especially not the in-laws who all had sons. She's clearly not the most level-headed or supportive mom. That night, Annie apologizes to Luke and then hops on his banana. She's rough, but Luke likes it gentle. Annie tells Luke to get off her, and Luke expresses that it seems like Annie can't handle it whenever Luke is trying to be respectful. The movie transitions back to young Annie, who gets Plan B. Surprisingly, Liam was the one who took her. She even apologizes to Liam, saying she didn't mean to hook up with anyone else. Liam says it's no big deal. Annie says she thinks she was taken advantage of. Liam says she's insane and says Annie doesn't even know what consent means. Annie apologizes again, and soon the rest of the boys who mistreated her are in the car. Annie goes to school as if nothing happened. She looks back at Mr. Larson, who looks from afar. Later, Mr. Larson reports the incident to the headmaster. Mr. Mayer tells her how things will go down if Annie decides to report the incident. He warned her that she needs to be sure what happened, considering how much alcohol was involved. Mr. Larson reiterates that there's no obscurity because Annie said no. Annie breaks down and begins to question her own truth. Mr. Mayer then says he has to call Annie's mom. Then Annie tells them to stop and that she changed her mind about reporting it. After school, Annie runs to Arthur's house and tells him that Mr. Larson was fired for letting the girls leave the school dance. Arthur tells Annie about the one time Peyton pinned Ben to the ground in the woods while Dean defecated on Ben's chest. Then Ben started cutting his wrists. Ben leaves, fuming at Arthur since he nonchalantly just disclosed Ben's dark secret. Arthur is now upset with Annie for allowing Dean, Peyton, and Liam to get away with it again. Annie says her mom can't know because she would absolutely hate Annie if she knew. Later at school, Dean tries to provoke Arthur, and Arthur ends up tripping Dean. Arthur says no one ever tries to stop Dean, then they fight. A teacher tries to break up the fight, but Arthur accidentally hits her. After he's suspended, Arthur is upset that Annie apologized to Liam. Annie is then upset and calls Arthur a loser. The older Annie is now back at her old school to do the documentary interview. She explains what happened on that fateful day. She recalls looking at Dean's neck before a loud explosion occurs before them. Students are thrown across the room. After the blast, Annie lies on the floor when a friend helps her up. They go upstairs to hide in a room where they try to barricade it. We see that Ben is the gunman. Ben shoots Olivia, who was trying to call for help. In her interview, Erin says that Ben calls Annie's name, and Erin wonders if that means Ben and Annie had an understanding. Annie replies that yes, Ben and she are both victims. Ben goes to Peyton and asks if Peyton wants to go to the woods. Peyton apologizes before he's shot. Ben nods at Annie before he leaves the room. All the students go to Peyton to help him out. Annie grabs a knife and tells them they need to get out of there. They go downstairs. Then Liam is shot. Liam tries to catch up, and Annie decides not to hold the door open for him. Erin asks her why didn't she hold the door open. Annie narrates it's because she didn't want to risk her life for one of the guys that took advantage of her. However, she tells Erin it's because she wasn't brave enough. Downstairs, Dean is hiding. Arthur is revealed to be the other shooter. Arthur tells Beth to get out of there because he likes her. Beth runs for her life. Arthur points the gun at Annie and tells her to grow a spine, then hands the gun to Annie, suggesting to shoot Dean. Annie admits to the viewers that she wanted to kill Dean, but she doesn't tell Aaron this. Dean looks at Annie, but isn't able to shoot him. Arthur grabs the gun from Annie and ends up shooting Dean in the spine. Annie grabs her knife and stabs Arthur in the neck. Arthur is shocked and eventually dies. Annie admits that Arthur's look was of confusion, and to this day, she is unable to hold a knife without seeing his face. She recalls the day of the funeral when people were gossiping about Annie because Dean's story didn't match hers. Dean told everyone that Annie was rejected by Dean because Annie had slept with two of his best friends, and she got her revenge by helping Ben and Arthur plan a massacre. After Dinah finds out that Annie had slept with half the victims, Annie's mother lets go of Annie's hand. Annie was labeled as a woman scorned. Even Beth didn't want to talk to her. In the car, Dinah is furious with Annie for getting too drunk and allowing the boys to take advantage of her. Dinah tells Annie that she's disgusted with her and she's not the daughter she raised. Aaron wonders why Annie never filed charges against the boys. Then he tells Annie that she's lucky to have a mother that supports her. Their interview is interrupted when Dean walks, or I should say wheels, into the room. Dean wants 5 minutes with Annie, but Annie storms off. Annie writes the rest of her story in her journal. She was forced to finish her next 2 years at the same school. During a field trip to New York, she bumps into a woman that commanded people, and she was inspired to be like her. Annie goes home and tells Luke that she's going to write her story herself. The next day, Annie tells her boss that she might move to London. She gives her story to her boss and wants the New York Times to print it. Her boss opens up about a non-consensual act that happened to her, then tells Annie that her half-assed story isn't going to make it because Annie is too apologetic about the boys that took advantage of her. She's too nice towards the people that failed her. Her boss tells her to write it, as if no one would read it. During a book event, Dean talks about what happened to him. Annie peers between the bookshelves as people are inspired by Dean. Later, the two have a private chat. Dean doesn't want Annie to tell her the whole truth because he has a wife and daughters. Dean begins to make excuses, saying he was drunk when he was taking advantage of her. He then threatens Annie to not talk about what happened that night, or he'll double down on his lies. Dean starts to cry and drops his handkerchief. Annie decides to help him. Eventually, Dean admits that he raped Annie. It turns out that Annie had recorded their entire conversation. At the rehearsal dinner, news breaks out that the New York Times will be printing Annie's side of the story. Luke finds out about this and is upset that Annie is getting too detailed. He doesn't want the entire world to know about it. He digs himself into a deeper hole by saying the boys had paid enough for their mistakes, and Annie makes it clear what the definition of a mistake is. Luke says Annie used to be so different and used to be so fun. Then he tells Annie they can figure it out. Annie then admits that she's been resenting Luke this entire time and feels bad about it. They'd break up. A few months pass and Annie is working at New York Times after her article is published. Nell celebrates Annie for going viral. Women all over comment about the bravery of Annie's article. Anything from feelings of shame to not being able to tell their stories, and thank Annie for her work. On the Today Show, she is interviewed about her story while her mother anxiously watches. Not everyone is a fan though. A woman I forget her name, tells Annie that Dean has worked so hard on gun reform and hopes that Annie's 15 minutes of fame could hopefully help many people. Annie tells her to go shuck herself and walks away like a boss. It turns out the writer Jessica Knoll based the gang's non-consensual acts on her own life at a private school. All the other details like the school shooting were added on though. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and please don't forget to like the videos and subscribe to my channel for more videos and updates.